Welcome to Solar Selling with Trev White. I'm going to talk about engine oil pressure gauges. Engines, let's face it, they're a pain in the ass. And on a yacht, we'd like not to have them, but we do have them. Well, I've been dealing with an engine oil pressure gauge which has been running too high. And it's been giving me a lot of grief. How do I fix it? Trial and error at this moment is how I fix it. I was leaving port. I needed to give the yacht full revs to get around some reef. Wind was against me, tide was against me. The engine sounded good, and I just put the throttle down, and as you do, you trust that your engine's ready to go, and that's what I did. I put the throttle down, and I'm pounding away, getting around what is a dangerous place. I could have changed tack, I could have sailed further out to sea, but I've got an engine. So, using that engine, I can save myself a considerable amount of time. I can just motor against the wind and get around areas of concern, which is why you have a motor. That's why God invented motors. But when they go wrong, that's when you start to get concerned. I mean, motors are not cheap. A motor on a yacht my size is probably 15 grand, maybe 20 grand by the time you get a new one installed. But and my motor's old. It's a 1974 BMC 2.52 diesel. Old as the hills. It used to be the same motor that ran in the black taxis in London. Diesel motor. Not petrol. So it's been around for a number of years, but they were built many years ago, and they a lot of them are in older European yachts and canal boats. So motor's been in my boat for 50 odd years, and it starts first time every time. It runs like a dream, purrs like a kitten. Well, a kitten that's been on the scotch all night. Nonetheless, it starts first time every time, runs like a pig for about 10 minutes, and then it settles down. It runs beautifully. It never lets me down. But lately, its oil pressure gauge has been running off the charts. So in this particular instance, I'm trying to get around this area, and I'm looking down and going, fuck, the oil pressure gauge is redlining. It wasn't just bouncing a little bit into the high pressure. It was fucking redlining. And I'm going, fuck. I couldn't release the pressure. I'm listening to the engine. I'm looking at the temperature. Temperature's good. Engine sounds okay. And, I had like 5 or 10 minutes to get around this, this place where I need to get around, without tacking. I thought, well, hell, I'm just going to push it a little bit more. And the engine hung in there, so I got around and could reset the sails, and I could ease off the motor, and then I eased it back, and the engine went back to normal pressure. But as soon as I gave it higher revs, it started to read high again. And it started to bounce, and I'm trying to work out what the fuck's going on. Get the engine, now that I wasn't in danger of floundering on reef. The sails are set, the autopilot's on, and the seas were reasonably rough. So it's not the easiest day to be pulling the engine, cover off and working on your boat. But, you get it off and secure the engine hatches so they don't fall over and break something or me. And, there's no other boats around, and so I'm now in the engine looking for oil leaks or things that don't look right, and listening to the engine. And the engine sounds good, like it's been a reliable engine. It's, as I said, it's a 50-year-old engine, but, I replaced a number of parts, and I thought when I bought the boat I would replace it, but 6 years on, I love it. I love this engine. I'm probably going to rebuild it before I replace it. It's so bloody reliable, and you can still get parts for these old things. You can still rebuild them, which is even better. It's a big, massive cast iron block. It probably weighs 200 kilos. It's a massive heatsink, so it's not fantastic in the tropics. When it gets hot, it stays hot, but it's reliable, and that's important. There's so many new engines that are not super reliable. They've got electronics in them. God forbid you want electronics on a boat or a motor in the middle of the ocean, and you've got a bunch of electronics. I mean, there's nothing worse. This has no electronics, not one. It has it has 2 sensors: temperature, oil pressure. That's it. And an alternator. That's the only electronics on the bloody motor. You can pull all those wires off and the thing will keep running. It's beautiful. I love its simplicity. But we just kept, my brother's on board, and we just kept plugging away, and we had a 6 or 7 hour sail, and so once we cleared the island and eased it back off, it was sitting there, checked the engine, there's nothing going on, but as soon as I amped up the revs, it would start to fluctuate again. I'm checking the sensor, trying to make sure that it wasn't loose. It didn't make any difference. So eventually we just turned off the engine and we sailed down from Port Vila to Epi, which is, a good 6 or 7 hours, and we had a good strong breeze. And once we got within Kui of Epi, we had to turn on the engine again. We had to, motor in the last few miles, and then, up into the bay and anchor. And again, once the engine had cooled off, but as soon as we started applying some decent revs, it started to fluctuate again. It started to redline, which is frustrating. It's really frustrating. You go, fuck, like, how do I fix this? I'm in the middle of nowhere. I don't have spare engine sensors. My brother's more mechanically minded than me, and he's thinking, well, there's not too much going on. Like, the temperature's good, engine sounds good, it's not rattly. We pull off the oil filler cap, it's not blowing back oil, not spitting it out, so that's a good sign. There's not too much pressure in the engine. So we decided to just chill out and have a beer, as you do. It's either a beer or a cup of tea, but tonight it was a beer. And the following morning we were sailing across to Malakula and to Port Sandwich because there's bad weather coming. So I didn't really want to be pulling the engine apart, and I still had another 5 or 6 hours to sail, and with bad weather coming, so left it alone, ignored it, or tried to. It was in my mind. But, started the engine in the morning, started first time. We motored across again. Once we got within Kui of Port Sandwich, we turned on the engine and started giving it some revs, and she started to fluctuate again. We tried to ignore it as we motored up the river, or motored up the entrance to Port Sandwich, and got in there and then dropped the pick. And once we got the pick down and we were happy that it was well set, we're in a good safe location where it could blow its ass off, but we were pretty well protected. We could then think about pulling down the motor and trying to work out what was going on. So we the next morning, that was the job. Weather was coming in, it was rainy and shitty, and there's not much else to do. Like, it wasn't a good day for fishing or exploring. So started pulling the engine covers off and getting access and working out what's going on, checking all the wiring for the sensors, and they were good, and checking the sensor relays, and they were okay. Gauges seemed okay. Sometimes you might get some salt in there, but that was okay, and sprayed a heap of moisture inhibitor in. Nothing seemed to make any difference. And then we pulled the oil pressure sensor out, pulled it apart, cleaned it, sprayed cleaned out the sensor access, made sure there's nothing blocking that, cleaned out the sensor, washed it out in petrol, sprayed a shitload of WD-40 into the sensor recess, and put it all back together. It didn't seem to make a huge amount of difference, but I thought that maybe it was the sensor, maybe it was blocked. So I thought we were there. And we spent another few days in Port Sandwich, did a bit of fishing. It's like quite a big blow blew through, so we just chilled out and did a bit of fishing. Caught a couple of decent fish that looked like mangrove jack, and it was a great spot just to chill out. And went exploring and walked up to the local village for market day. The little shop in Port Sandwich did bread every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I got fresh bread, and my brother managed to get some Coke for his bourbon, which is pretty cool. When he was running out of Coke, he was starting to worry he was going to have to drink his bourbon without Coke. But luckily, the trading ship came through and got another 6 cans of bourbon, or 6 cans of Coke actually. But that was it. He cleaned them out. So we spent a few days there, and then we decided to sail up to Santo. Oh no, sail to Santo. Yeah, we did sail to Santo, and again, we started throttling down, and initially it was okay, and then gave it a few more revs, and she started fluctuating again. So fuck, like that didn't work. That's frustrating. And again, there's nothing you can do while you're sailing. The last thing you want to be doing is playing with the motor. And once we got in clean water and we just eased off and killed the motor, sailing along, thought, we'll address it once we get up to somewhere safe where we've got facilities again, potentially a mechanic, potentially places where we can buy things in, and started doing more research on the engine. And old BMC 2.52, or the Leyland Thornycraft BMC 2.52, has a engine oil pressure release valve piston spring and cap. So it's on the left-hand side of the engine when you're looking at the engine, and initially it looked like it was on the top of the engine. And me and the bro, once we got up to Santo and we're on a mooring, we're looking everywhere for this bloody thing. We're thinking, well, maybe it's not there. On the other side there's something that looks very similar, but it's attached to the crank, so we didn't want to be playing with that. And eventually we found it. This thing is right on the bottom of the engine, tucked in under the oil filter. So again, in the worst possible bloody place you could find, and there's not much room, difficult to get to. Had to pull more parts of the engine housing off to get to it. You're lying upside down with your arm through a bloody crack in some housing, trying to get to it, try to get a spanner on it, and this thing's spring loaded as well. So and it's a spring loaded plunger. Eventually got in there, found it after looking for about an hour, trying to work out where the hell this thing was. I didn't believe it actually had one, and then got in there. My brother got the nut off and didn't lose the nut into the bilge, thankfully. Didn't lose the spring into the bilge, even more thankfully, because the bilge was a pain in the ass to get into. It's quite deep, and very, very difficult to actually get things when they drop in the bilge. And got the nut and the spring out, but the plunger wouldn't come out. And I think that's the problem. I think the plunger has gummed up with maybe use. Maybe there's a film in there and the plunger's not moving freely, and that's causing the problem, or the spring might be losing tension. It's hard to tell. I'm not an expert on these engines, even though I've had it for a number of years. It's the first time I even knew it had a bloody plunger until I started looking at the book and online. And I think the only way to actually get the plunger out is to pull the engine down. There's only about 4 inches of space once you get the cap off. So we jiggling around in there, and we sprayed a shit ton of WD-40 in there, let that sit in there, and then tried to move it. Nothing was moving, and the plunger appears to be cone-shaped. So my thoughts were to try and get it out and then resurface it with some 800 micron wet and dry sandpaper. Smooth it all up. Put some sandpaper in the shaft, and get any carbon or gum out of there. But that didn't work, and I think maybe you could get the piston out with a rare earth magnet if you could find one that's maybe 10 mil wide, which I didn't have. So tried a number of things, nothing worked, but we're tapping in there with a small screwdriver, just trying to tap it and move it around, and again just put more and more WD-40 in and lube, and thought, well, we'll give it a go. Got it all back together, and getting it back together was just a complete pain in the ass. This thing's spring loaded, and there is no room to put any pressure on it. So I'm trying to put pressure on the nut. My brother's trying to turn the bloody nut. We're both trying to make sure we don't lose the nut into the bilge. Finally get the thing back together. And the next time we start the engine and head off, it's working. It's like working fine. Give it a boot in the guts, and it's not redlining. So I think, oh well, we've had a bit of success here, so that's a bonus. Try and forget about it for a little while, but no. Sure enough, a couple of days later, it starts fluctuating. It starts, needle starts bouncing, and again, still not quite sure what's going on with this bloody oil pressure gauge. It's been like that a couple of weeks, and then today I decided, fuck it, I'm going to pull it down again and try and get the thing out. So back in Port Villa, just dropped my brother off at the airport, and he's flying back home. So pulled the engine all down, all the covers off, got the access bolt and the spring out, and again I sprayed some really corrosive, not corrosive, but, you know, detergent type cleaners in there to try and dissolve any gum, and then filled it up with silicone lube. Couldn't move the actual piston itself, couldn't get it out. Couldn't find any magnets small enough to get on the back of this piston, if it had come out at all. I mean, I don't even know that it would come out. And you know, even if I talk to a mechanic, most mechanics today would not have worked on these engines. I mean, I've run into mechanics before who used to work on these engines. They used to be quite common in old fishing boats as ice machines and things like that, or maybe on farms for old you know, Leyland trucks and, you know, tractors. But there's not that many of them around. But, you know, it's still a reliable old beast, and I hate to think I'm going to lose this engine over a bloody oil pressure relief valve. But yeah, I've since just put it back together and spent like at least an hour trying to get this bloody piston spring and gauge in, and end up getting a ring spanner on the end of the nut, because it's cone shaped, and pulling that in, and then another spanner slowly, methodically turning the nut to try and get it right, you know, trying to get the angle right. And eventually it took and got it in, and then a bit of gasket cement to pull it in. And then I found that the sensor, oil pressure sensor, was leaking oil, so had to get into that. So that involved pulling a bunch of things off to actually get to that sensor as well. Pulled that out and then resealed that with some gasket cement to oil leak. So yeah, I mean, engines, they're essential on a boat, or at least I like to think they're essential. I mean, you can get away without them, but it makes life challenging. They certainly do create some drama. And if you've got a yacht and you've got an engine, you need a bloody good manual. You need a troubleshooting manual if you can get one. You should have Nigel Calder's, you know, boat Bible, mechanical and electrical boat Bible, because that guy's a fucking genius. But yeah, like, you know, if you've got a forum where, you know, people have got those engines, you want to hook it into that forum. And I'm fortunate in some ways, because these engines are quite common in canal boats in Europe, and there's lots of really old canal boats, and there's lots of people who call them, but, you know, they're purists. You know, they don't want to give up these old engines. They want to keep maintaining them. And let's face it, why not? I mean, they got plenty of horsepower. You can still get parts for them. You can put new cylinder sleeves in them, pistons, rings, cranks, bearings. You know, there's nearly every part you can rebuild except the heat exchanger, which I found out. You know, like, I had a problem with the heat exchanger. I couldn't get a new heat exchanger, so but I managed to repair it. So yeah, 50-year-old engine. Like, parts are getting harder, but, you know, like, my water pump looks like it's about to fail, and, you know, it's an Austin Healey water pump, funnily enough, because there wasn't that many cars made back in the 50s. You know, like, companies produced items, and then car manufacturers use those items for multiple cars and with different labels. So you just got to be creative and think laterally. And you know, I was fortunate enough to find 6 years ago, when I had a fucked water pump, that it was an Austin Healey 3000 water pump. Fitted perfectly. It's the identical product. So I've just ordered another one. And but yeah, I got 6 years out of it. I mean, these are older engines, so parts are a little bit more fragile, I think. And if that fails, I may have to go to an electric water pump with a blanking plug. We'll see. You just keep making do. You keep improvising, and you know, you keep them running. And you know, and why not? I mean, you know, some people just put a brand new engine in, and you know, the thought process is that's better. And it can be. A brand new engine might give you a couple of years of no problems, but it might also be a complete pain in the ass. I mean, I've had brand new engines with lots of electronics on them, and they are nothing but a pain in the ass, where you can't actually get them to run, because you need a diagnostic tool if there's a problem. You know, if they shut down, you need to be able to diagnose it and then reset the motor. These old clunkers, there are none of those problems. You know, like, it's a very rudimentary engine. It's like an old Massey Ferguson tractor. You give it fuel, you give it air, you give it compression, and the thing will work, or it should work, if you've got everything lined up. And, you know, generally on my engine, you know, if I've got, it's normally fuel. Like, I occasionally get a bit of a fuel block in there or a bit of air getting in if I've left the engine for a while. I think it's the fuel pump. Yeah, sucks a bit of air, so that's probably one of my next jobs, is to replace the fuel pump or the fuel pump diaphragm. But yeah, I tend to know what it is these days, and but you know, old engines can be a godsend. You know, I've seen people with brand new engines, and they've had to fly in mechanics from another country to diagnose and fix their engine. Like, I was up in Fiji, and there was a guy with these two 250 outboards, all electronic. There's no one in the country could work on them. He had to fly a guy from New Zealand with his toolbox to get these things operating properly, because they were just too... I met a guy in Harvey Bay in Australia. He had a big motor catamaran with two V6 BMW engines, which had been marinized by mercury. Again, one of them shut down, and the other one was, you know, having problems as well. He couldn't get them to run. You know, he limped in on one engine into port, and you can't leave port on one engine with a family on board. You know, like, especially in, you know, some of these offshore conditions, that's just suicidal. You know, particularly if you're having problems with one engine. I mean, you know, what was it? Was it fuel? Was it sensors? If you can't diagnose what it is, would you leave? I mean, I've had workboats where I've had sophisticated engines go into limp mode in the worst possible time. You know, when you're right in the middle of a tidal rip, or, you know, going through a reef, they overheat, they go into limp mode, and you know, you don't want that. You want to be able to push the engine just a little bit to get you through what is a shitty situation, and then back it off. The last thing you want is the engine making its own decisions on when it backs itself off. So, yeah, in my case, I pushed the engine past what I considered was a dangerous place, and then I eased it off, and then I turned it off. But that's my choice. I can push this old engine to destruction if I choose to, and at times I have. I have driven this thing redlined, trying to get it off a lee shore where a mooring broke, and I nearly lost the yacht. But, you know, I had black diesel smoke pouring out the back end of this thing as we crawled off a lee shore, and, you know, it wasn't a great situation, but the engine didn't give up. And if I had have destroyed the engine, so be it. You know, it would have given me the opportunity to save the boat, and you know, I can always put a new engine in or rebuild it if I need to. But yep, in this case, it is oil pressure gauge and relief valve punishment that I'm dealing with. So I guess when I start the engine again and I head off on to the next location, I'll find out whether my latest fix has worked, or when I get back down to the next nearest, you know, educated mechanic, I will try and find a fix. I hate to think that I have to pull the engine down to fix it, but we'll see. Thanks for joining me. Safe sailing. See you out there.